Good afternoon. We're back on the record. We concluded public input. Now we're back to staff and the applicant to respond to questions raised by members of the public and requests for clarification. So I don't know who wants to start. Jim?
Madam Examiner, James Inc. for the record, the way we're going to respond is Yuri from TR Transportation is going to respond first because that seems to be one of the largest unknowns things that are moving about this, the ITE part. So he's going to respond to that, and then I'll follow up and respond hopefully to every comment that was made.
Good afternoon. For the record, Yuri Baika with TR Transportation Consultants. We prepared a traffic study for this rezoning application, and as part of our traffic study, we are required to use what is called ITE trip duration manual. And we use the latest edition that's available to us. And this manual is basically used to come up with traffic projections for projects. And the way the manual is developed is they take surveys all over the country to come up, real surveys that people go out there and survey number of traffic goes to specific uses, and they collect all that data and come up with these equations that then we then use to project traffic that will be for this project. And this is a required source for us to use all over the state, all over the country. It's a standard that's been approved everywhere.
So this is the industry standard
Industry
for
standard.
evaluating trip generation from various uses.
Various uses, correct. Another important point I want to mention is that not all of the project traffic will be using San Carlos Boulevard and Main Street intersection. You also have, if you can scroll up a little higher,
Zoom out a little bit to pick up Buttonwood.
you also have Buttonwood Drive over here. So some project traffic will be using that driveway to get to San Carlos Boulevard. And there's also a signal at Santa Carlos Boulevard and Buttonwood Drive. So not all traffic is going to be using that intersection to the south. You have an option to go north. And our traffic study did consider that. We assigned some trips using Buttonwood Drive to get to San Carlos Boulevard. And as I previously mentioned, FDOT is doing a multi-million-dollar improvement on San Carlos Boulevard. And I just looked at the FDOT's website, and I confirmed that this project is going to begin at the end of the summer of 2024. So that's beginning this year. And again, as part of that improvement to San Carlos Boulevard, they will be constructing a new signal at Main Street and San Carlos Boulevard, which will help people exiting Main Street to get to San Carlos Boulevard more efficiently and easier than it is right now. Right now, it's just unsignalized intersection.
Right, and your testimony is people can leave this site and either exit via Main Street at a not signalized intersection or can turn right and travel north on Buttonwood to the intersection,
Of Buttonwood and San Carlos Boulevard, which is also signal.
which is signalized.
And the Main Street and San Carlos Boulevard is also going to be a signal.
Right,
It'll
at
be
some point in the future, we don't know when. All we know is the project's gonna begin summer of '24.
Yeah, construction project, yeah. So it'll be most likely done before this project ever builds out.
And does this project contemplate improvements to the intersection with Main Street other than the installation of a signal?
No. So that's San Carlos Boulevard is a state roadway, and that's a state project. So FDOT will be improving San Carlos Boulevard and turn lanes along that road, but the side streets, those are maintained by Lee County. And so they're not proposing any improvements along Main Street in terms of additional turn lanes.
So it'll only remain within the FDOT right-of-way at that intersection?
Yes. And I also want to emphasize this is not the only traffic study that we do. We also have to go through a development order process, which is much more detailed process than this. And at that time, we will do a very detailed traffic study that will be also reviewed by the county staff. And at that time, we will evaluate any on-site related improvements, such as turn lanes, that will be required by this project. At this time, we don't get into those details because we're still at a rezoning stage. And that's pretty much it for me, unless you have any other questions.
Yuri, can I ask you a question?
Yes, Jim?
When you do the traffic impact statement, you have different levels, be it a comp plan change, be it a zoning change, be it a development order, all different criteria. Is that criteria, that methodology, is that established by the county that we have to adhere to?
Yes, so Lee County has administrative codes, I believe it's 11-17. That's basically traffic study guidelines for rezoning applications. And our traffic study was completely consistent with those guidelines, and we met all the requirements. The county reviewed our traffic study multiple times. There's a process that's called sufficiency review process, where we submit a traffic study, and then the county comes back to see if there's any comments, any changes we need to make. And so we go back and forth until the traffic study is consistent with the traffic study guidelines that's adopted by Lee County.
And this is at the zoning stage?
At the zoning stage, yes.
The development order stage, you say you're going to drill down deeper, I guess, about what
Yes.
site-related improvements may be warranted?
Yes, and Lee County has a separate guidelines for traffic studies for development orders. And so we have to follow that once we get to that process in our project. Jim, did I answer your
Yeah, that answers it perfectly. I got one other question, though, just to restate the discussion that we had this morning about the day use of the recreational facilities. In your mind, in your studies, and you're looking around in your travels, is the idea of a day pass in a hotel resort to their amenities, be it golf course, be it pool, be it marina, be it anything, is that a common practice in restaurants or in resorts? And would you consider that, in your opinion, in the definition of the ITE 330?
Yes, I do. And most of the resort hotels I personally visit, they do have day passes, and so, yes.
And you're saying that's further substantiated by the fact there is not a separate calculation for day passes in the ITE manual. And there's a distinction in the ITE manual between resort hotels and regular hotels.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
For the record, James Inc., I summarize everybody's comments, I hope, and I'm gonna answer them in two categories. One that I think is relevant to what we're doing today, and then just to answer the questions, I'm gonna answer all the stuff that's not relevant to what we're doing today, just for education and knowledge of what's there. So I wanna go back just to finish up on the TIS. There was a question of who pays for the TIS. To answer that question, it is part of our team, our requirement that we do a traffic impact statement. We pay for that traffic impact statement within county guidelines, as you heard. We submit that as part of our application package. Staff reviews it, comments, goes back and forth a couple times to get to a point where it's sufficient. And then at that point, staff can write the report in support or not, and we can move forward. So I just want to put it on the record that we pay for the traffic report. I mean, that's just standard. Some jurisdictions that are smaller, the developer has to pay for both sides because they don't have a traffic engineer. But that was that part. So the relevant stuff that I wanted to talk about, I believe I said this was a minor change, and that may have been misleading in saying it's a minor change. We're making an amendment of a few items. The biggest item is the 55 dwelling units to a 240-room hotel. And where I said it was minor is in the traffic generation, we're real close to being there. We have less overall trips. We have more AM, PM trips, but they're minor. So we were trying to equate when we got to our number of get as close as we could to what fits within the approved design box that we can live in of, you know, the cube of the building and have an attractive building. There was a comment on the mobile home lots on Oak Street. They have been in the master PD for the beginning. They are there now. They're zoned as MPD. One of the things that created some problems is not that long ago, this parcel used to be 6 or 7 parcels, and the examiner may remember we had 4 or 5 different zoning categories. I mean, it was a whole mess. We went to, as soon as the property taxes were paid for last year, we went to the property appraiser and we said we'd like one unified strap number. So we made one unified strap number. Changed the Marina address from 1195 in the application to 1185, which it is today, because that's the address of the little building. So that's where the address change came in.
And that's the whole 7.47 acre.
That's the whole 7.7. We just combined it all into one strap number. If you look on there, you can see on the website, it's just one parcel now. It also created an unintended consequence that's caused some problems, and I've experienced them, is in Acela, which is the electronic records of the county, when you change strap numbers, all of the permits and all of the numbers disappear when you go look for records. If you go look at that strap number, you won't find this application. It's out there, but it's tagged to a strap number that doesn't exist anymore. So it takes a little while. So that did make it difficult to find some documents. I experience it when that happens quite a bit. One of the things we talked about was the COP and bringing the COP in and expanding it on the rooftop and expanding it down on the ground in the playground. We look at that. We hired a landscape architectural firm that has done numerous resorts. Disney, Hyatt, Hilton, Marriott, all kinds of resorts. We feel confident that they know how to create an environment that alcohol and playgrounds mix. Because if you go to a resort, it's there every day. I mean, you go to the pool, they have alcohol on the pool deck. They have, so we hired them to do that. But as you go through your deliberations, making a request, can we look at it as 2 separate requests instead of one? The up on the rooftop may be different than the way you look at on the ground floor. So we just look at that as 2 separate ways to look at that. There was a document, which I believe has been repealed, that was provided to you that says no more multifamily on the island. That was argued years ago, and that was part of the ebb tide project where they were tied to that. We weren't in our original zoning, and some of our detractors were highly in support of ebb tide, which is twice the size of us. But I just wanted to point that out, that document, I believe, has been repealed, same as the CRA, reference to the CRA that the county repealed years ago. So both of those are not legal documents in our opinion. Question on the gravity sewer. One of the residents states it all goes to a pump station, that I was in error. I wasn't looking at the whole picture. We have gravity in front of our property. All gravity sewer in Lee County goes to a pump station somewhere. She was correct. It's on the other side of Main Street. It's owned by Lee County Utilities. They're responsible for maintaining it, making sure it works. As Yuri presented on the intersection of Main Street and San Carlos, FDOT doesn't plan on any improvements on Main Street or right-of-way taking. There is an LDO out there that ebb tide did recently, I think this year or late last year. They have an LDO to meet their entitlement commitment to renovate Main Street, the whole length of it. It exists. It goes to their for sale, and they can advertise a fully entitled project because they have all the permits, they have the zoning, they have that part. So there's no plan, our plans for doing our part of Main Street. We have the engineering done. We have not applied for a permit yet, but we have the engineering done. There's no right-of-way taking. We can meet our requirements inside the existing right-of-way. Comment on dewatering. I heard November last year is when we did it, which we didn't have anything going on in November last year. But I believe that we could have done it for a day or two, which I did in my original testimony. We did not put a pipe in the seawall. The seawall was a pipe through the seawall was put in 05. And it's still there today. It was not taken out. It is our main discharge for our stormwater management system. And right now it's blocked off. It's got silt screens on it. It's, no water's discharging from the site. Our work that we're doing is an allowable with the state dewatering, and we're keeping it on site while we're putting our foundation in. So no water should be leaving the site right now to go into the canal. And the statement of we're having quantity of storage in the canal, that's not accurate. Everything we do is by state standards, and the state would not allow us to do that. The comment about Lee-Tran, it is correct. Lee-Tran is not servicing Main Street today. I've talked with the planners numerous times and will continue to talk with the Lee-Tran planners. And as the area develops, it may become down Main Street. If ebb tide gets built, when we're built, it may then create interest that Lee-Tran might want to do something to make that work. But right now it's not. In our zoning condition, we have to provide a bus stop anyway, so it'll just be there when we get there. Now, what I consider the non-relevant stuff is there was a comment we're building right up to the seawall. That's incorrect. We have 13.5-foot setback. That's in place today in the current zoning. We're keeping the 13.5-foot setback. One of the residents down the way, her lot that was on the canal, we have a 13.5-foot setback, but she's in a MH2 zoning, so she may have something different in that. And it's just the land development code would figure that out. There was a comment that the property owners bought the boatyard across the street. That is an accurate statement, that they bought the boatyard down the street. They fixed it up. It's now a nice working boatyard. There is a new travel lift that is in permitting to replace the travel lift. And the idea of forklifts going back and forth across Main Street is that's just plain silly. That's not going to happen. Parking spaces, numbers, we have some internal working. How many parking spaces is not part of a zoning application. That's when you get the DO, you have to prove you have enough parking spaces. So at this time, I don't even know how many parking spaces we have, but we're working on that, and it will be compliant with 34-2020 when it gets there. And then there was the simmer piece, which is just to the west, right here, which was a mixed use type endeavor of office and some apartments and boats and some industrial warehousing kind of stuff that was there. That property is pretty much not in use today, and most of the waterfront area related was severely damaged by Hurricane Ian. And the other interesting fact is these four properties and these properties right there are or have been recently listed for sale. So any ties that we have at that point, it's not being used and it's being sold. With that, I'd like to just summarize my conclusion that we were asking for the allowable to build 240 hotel rooms in lieu of 55 residents. The change in the townhome tract to add multifamily so we can build flat units instead of townhouse units as was showed, and expand the consumptive on premises to, from what we had with outdoor dining to the rooftop area, and then hopefully separately if there's a problem, that the playground area can be discussed separately as to their merits. And with that, we're done.
Okay, thank you. County staff?
I don't have anything to add. Mr. Mark Evans from our transportation engineer is here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, Marcus, were you in agreement, in essence, with Yuri's testimony regarding the ITE and its application to the uses requested as part of this zoning modification? Would you please come to the podium?
Yes.
I'm going to swear you in because I don't think you were here. Do you swear or affirm the testimony and evidence you give will be the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Marcus Evans, Department of Community Development. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Florida.
Speak up. They can't hear you.
Can I touch this?
No, you have
Okay.
to lean closer, that's all.
All right. Marcus Evans, Lee County Department of Community Development. I'm a professional engineer licensed in the state of Florida, and in the past I've been accepted as an expert witness in this forum in both traffic engineering and transportation planning. Thank you. So I was involved in the review of the traffic study. I did hear some of the testimony. I was absent hearing the hearing from about 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock because I had another meeting. But nonetheless, I think I have a fairly good understanding of what the issues are. Mr. Baikal mentioned something about the resort hotel, and the question, it sounds like, is whether or not the traffic studies that were done and incorporated into ITE's trip generation manual, if those included resort hotels that had that issued day passes that allowed folks from the outside that weren't staying on site to use the facilities. When I look at the description that ITE put together, they did about 6 or 7 studies, or they incorporated about 6 or 7 studies done throughout the United States in California, Florida, and South Carolina. 6 or 7 studies isn't a lot of studies, but based on that, their description does indicate that the resort hotel, and I think Mr. Baikal indicated this as well, it indicates that it offers a wide variety of recreational facilities and programs such as golf courses, tennis courts, beach access, or other amenities. What's being proposed with this particular case is an amenity. It certainly would be an amenity to the guests, but it also may be a draw to those that are staying off-site that may wish to use the facilities. Do these resort hotels cater to those off-site? My sense is yes, they probably do to some degree. The studies that ITE did, it's silent on how many trips might be from folks that are located off-site that are coming to use the amenities perhaps for the day or for a few hours. It's silent on that, but I think it could be assumed that indeed at least some of the resort hotels that were included in IT's trip generation manual very well could have had those options.
Well, my understanding of Mr. Baikal's testimony is that this data is compiled by observing actual uses and the trips generated by those uses in different parts of the country, and then they create this standard.
Correct.
If that's the case, and it is reasonable and customary to assume that resort hotels have day passes available, which we all know many do, that would be included in the trips observed by the observers who compiled the data. Would you agree with that?
As I understand your question, yes. IT is silent on that, but again, for those that may be familiar with resort hotels, I do know that at least one that I'm aware of on Captiva does allow folks to come and use their facilities and actually pay a fee. There are a limited number of parking spaces for those type of users, and in this case, there is no limit per se, although there is a limit in the sense that this site can only handle so much parking. So if I understand your question correctly, yes, I would assume that some of that is incorporated in here. The extent of it, I don't know. There's only only 6 or 7 different studies. One study could issue a lot of day passes. Another one could issue 0 day passes.
But
We
that
don't really
data is
know.
included in the figure that they arrived at.
I would assume so, yes. I would assume so.
Separately, this project is already approved for commercial recreational facility commercial, groups 1 and 2.
Okay.
So in theory, when they analyze the traffic, that standalone use, even if they weren't asking for a hotel, they could build a rooftop water playground like they contemplated herein. And that was part of the use menu that they already have approved. And in theory, was taken
Yeah.
into account when predicting the overall trip generation.
Yeah, I follow what you're saying. I would say that during the development order review that we would capture that and we would take a closer look at that because we'd have a much better idea of what they're really going to do. Right now, it's a fairly open canvas or
Right,
clear
it's
canvas.
conceptual.
It is very conceptual, so we don't know. It's my understanding that just a few days ago we were made aware of this idea of the day passes and those type of amenities, and that wasn't understood to my knowledge, was not understood through the process up until more recently.
Will that have changed what you looked at in the ITE manual?
Perhaps.
Well, you just said
But-
that they don't have a separate entry for that.
Correct.
You still would have to rely on the resort hotel.
We would, but again, if we're gonna look at a worst-case scenario, can I bring up a separate example that also might help with understanding this? A number of years ago, actually not terribly long ago, there was another case that was considered, went through the public hearing process, the Brightwater RPD, out in North Fort Myers off of Pritchett Parkway. In that particular residential plan development, mind you, there were a number of residential units that were approved through that, but there was also an amenity approved there as well, and that was the Crystal Lagoon, Brightwater Crystal Lagoon. And it's in, I'll reference the DCI case number if you want to look at it, DCI 2021-00023.
Right, I'm familiar with that case.
Okay.
The distinction between that case and this case is they were seeking approval of that use that was not already approved. So
Yes, that's true.
you're looking at an
That's true.
addition to what was just an RPD that did not include commercial recreational
Right.
use. That's not the case here.
Exactly.
The
I
case
agree.
we have here is that use is already approved from a prior approval.
Understood.
So the trips generated from such a use is part of what was forecasted for the external trip generation for the project.
Yeah, there was a separate calculation for the lagoon itself. There was an assumption that some of the lagoon would be used by some residents, but then there were a certain number of parking spaces that would be allowed for the non-residents to actually
Right, but do you
use.
see the distinction
I
there?
do,
You're
yes.
introducing a completely brand-new use. We're
Yep.
not doing that here.
Yep,
So that use was already evaluated.
correct. The one thing with the Brightwater,
So
though.
it sounds like you're asking me that should be reevaluated a second time and added on top.
No, I'm not suggesting that. In Brightwater, the limit on the public using that facility was by the parking spaces.
Parking.
There were only a certain amount of parking spaces, so there were only a certain number of people that could actually use that. In this particular case, there are 200 parking spaces reserved for the public. It was assumed, as I recall going through the study, that those would be folks that would normally be going to the beach that would divert their trips. They would go to the site, they would take a trolley, go onto Fort Myers Beach. That was the intent, but there are those 200 spaces that would be used by the quote-unquote public. So there's an accounting for a number of spaces that people would actually use this site, whether they just park there or potentially use it for some other use. There was some accounting for additional traffic that would be using this site. That additional traffic could be tied very well tied to this amenity that might be used by the day trippers as well. So from a traffic standpoint, I think if there wants to be, if it's decided that there is going to be a condition that limits the number of day users, it could be tied to a specific number of parking spaces, if indeed that was decided. But at the development order stage is when we're going to have a much better idea of what they're really doing here. Whether we look at that amenity separate, because we know there's going to be some day trippers and enough of them that it may bump the traffic up a bit, we or may not, depending on, again, what's presented to us, what we see.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Sharon, was there anything further?
No, ma'am.
Thank you, Marcus. Applicant, are there any further?
No, I don't think so. I think with the traffic part, I think the hearing examiner has a clear vision of what a resort hotel is, and we're not introducing a new use. And in reality, if we weren't as transparent as we were and left it off, it wouldn't even have come up and created a problem. And it's a normal, common, everyday use in a resort.
All right, well, if there's no further testimony or evidence, I'll close the hearing. I want to thank everyone for their time, especially members of the public. I know you've got to take time out of your day to spend it here when you could be doing something else you enjoy more. I appreciate hearing from you, and I will certainly take your remarks into consideration as I evaluate this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.